Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. We're going to be talking about virtual presentations and conversion, something that some of you may know more about than others. We really want to be able to talk about how to have impact online. Over the last few years, we've been doing all of our training virtually. We've had obviously lots of meetings like all of you, but we really today want to talk very specifically about this idea of speaking engagements, if you will. So whether you're speaking in a virtual conference or you're delivering a training or presentation, this will apply to you. Any of those sort of apply under this. And these are really short kind of punches of content where we want to give you some tactics and skills that you can immediately use to elevate and improve where you are. So they're not sort of deep dives, they're really tight, they're really small. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to us. You're also welcome to check out our YouTube where we have lots of content there to help support you to develop professionally. Holly, is there anything you'd like to add before we jump in and get started?
Well, when we were putting this together, Anne Marie and I like to kind of plot out, our content for the quarter. And we sort of both laughed about the fact that, 2.5 years ago, when everything sort of moved online, we ourselves sort of had this sort of mad panic of like, oh my God, we're going to have to do this all virtually. What is this going to look like? And the first few times, I personally feel like we learned so much about how to engage with an audience, how to sort of alter our own styles. And here we are now, 2.5 years later, and virtual speaking engagements have only continued to pick up steam, even as people have moved back to a lot of in-person events. So I feel very strongly that this is an absolute necessary skill that any professional who wants to advance needs to continue to hone and refine, you and I included, frankly. And so this is just a fun topic for me. And I feel like the 30 minutes are going to fly by.
Yeah, so let's talk about what conversion actually is. And when we think of conversion, I really think of it sort of in a business development context. And what I mean by that is if you have an audience that you're speaking to, what percentage of those clients or people become a client? Presumably that's why you're doing this speaking, to elevate yourself in the marketplace, to consider yourself a thought leader, and to generate revenue in some way, shape, or form. Now, this is not exclusively true. Obviously, you're doing presentations for other reasons as well, but we really want to just kind of explain what we mean by conversions. The other thing I just want to kind of integrate into this before we get too far down the path here is we hear a lot, nothing replaces in person. Like it's never as good. And I think you really need to challenge that belief. If you've ever done any work with us, if you've ever sat through any of our training, we talk a lot about cognitive behavior. And if you're leading from a belief system that says, hey, it can never be as good online as it is in person, then immediately you're starting in the one down position. And immediately the standards start declining. And I want to just say, like, we did a 3-hour training online. And the initial thought was, oh my gosh, like there's no way people can handle this. It's too intense. And it was a large training for a major client. And I have to tell you, the response was overwhelming. It was one of their highest rated trainings, live or online. And one of the responses was, in a lot of the evaluations, I wasn't sure I could sit through this, but that 3 hours flew by. That was not an accident. That was because of the design. That was because of our way of presenting and engaging. It was very consciously and thoughtfully designed and created. So the first thing I'm going to say is, whether it's you or those you lead or your team, if you're always in this, well, it's because it's online that it's not working. You've got to start there. And you've got to reevaluate your idea of the possibility of what online connection can be.
I would also just ask you a question, Anne Marie. I mean, I think that as you know, I used to be an attorney. I've sat through tons of like continuing legal education and other presentation by lawyers. And I don't really feel like anybody ever told me when I would go to do these presentations, like, this is a business development opportunity and you need to be positioning your content yes, you have to educate, the people who are there, but how are you actually positioning that content to influence them or into a certain outcome or decision? Has that been your experience as well? I mean, this may sound obvious to some who are watching, but I have to be really honest with you. As lawyers, I think there's this expectation, okay, you're going to go deliver content and you're going to impart information, and then you are never going to hear from these people again. So it's kind of a mindset reframe.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you and for those of you who don't know me, I mean, I've been doing this for 15 years, and the amount of people who go without thinking, like, what am I trying to accomplish? What's the objective? They'll say things like, it's great exposure, it's great marketing. It's this really kind of passive language instead of, what am I trying to accomplish? What am I trying to get? And one of the things I also think that's really important to think about is when you have a captive audience, and I feel really strongly about this, those people could be anywhere doing anything with their time. It is absolutely your responsibility. You owe it to the people in that room to bring your very best, because they are gifting you their time, and that time is exceptionally valuable. They are gifting you their attention. They deserve high quality delivery and high quality content. And for particularly the audiences we're dealing with, I don't want to waste my time. Holly and I have been to conferences together. We've absolutely walked out of sessions. I'm going to be very honest about that. And I'll tell you why, because my time is super precious to me. My time cannot be, purchased. I cannot purchase more time. I cannot, steal more time. I cannot beg or borrow for more time. So if you have my time, don't insult me by not coming prepared in a way that's going to be useful to me. So a couple of things when we talk about clear, concise, and connected. If you are creating slides that are nothing but text, it meets none of these bullet points. It is nor clear, nor concise, nor connected. And we see this a lot. And one of the questions I always ask is, if you have a slide that's nothing but text, are you reading that? Is the audience meant to read that? What is it doing there? That is a handout at best. People have Google now. Why would you do that to your audience and yourself? It's really disconnecting. It's really not useful. So you want to make sure that you are economical in your language and design. This is the kind of slide that you're looking at right now that you need to be designing, right? There's an image, there's some, large kind of words here. I'm not telling you every single thing that I'm saying to you in the slide. That's not what slides are for. And so really slides are meant to keep you on point, on rhythm, to direct you, a place for your, audience to land their eyes. It's not there for them to sit and read. They can go do that on their own computer if they need to. So really think about editing and cleaning up your decks and your style. Please don't read anything. I mean, people who just read from the podium or read from the notes, I think it's really disconnecting. Do enough preparation that you understand how to present without that kind of heaviness of either reading or a slide that's super dense. Things should be lighter and tighter, as I like to say.
Yeah, and I would say there's almost been, in some of the presentations that I've attended that have been virtual over the past few years, an over-reliance on text and slides now, right? Because we're not, when you're not in person, I think sometimes people feel like they need to rely on what else is going on visually on the screen rather than themselves filling the screen. So what do you say to that?
I just think, again, that's just a belief system that isn't accurate. I think that what really is happening is that people don't bring the same energy to an online presentation that they do live. I think they're sitting in a chair, they're collapsing into that, they're turning off their screen occasionally, or they're not doing things that are about being connected and being present and understanding that this is indeed an audience. There's something that happens that people just get sort of lazy or more casual. And I think what needs to, or I will also say conversely, way more formal and weird. So what do I mean by that? I was part of something and they were moderating, and these introductions were so formal and so bizarre. It was like two people sitting next to each other and they're like, good afternoon. Today, we'll be discussing, is that right, Bob? And it's like, what's going on here? Like, you still need to be human. I mean, right now, Holly and I talk to each other the way we would if we were sitting across the table at lunch. It has a presentation style. However, there's something that's the example I'll use is, I always say this, they call it TED Talks for a reason. They don't call it TED presentations. They don't call it TED seminars or workshops. It's a talk. And they really hit this point home. I have done coaching for TED Talks. I've delivered one. And the reason is they want this kind of presence, yes, but this kind of accessibility. And expertise should not be about jargon, formality. You should be able, if you were an expert, to explain and describe what your expertise is in a way that anyone could understand from anywhere. And if you can't do that, then what you're doing is you're really not being clear or concise. And for sure, you're disconnecting with a lot of people.
Yeah.
So Holly, you want to take some of this?
Sure. So again, going back to this idea of conversion, these are just some really quick hits, strong tips that you can take away if you're here, if you're watching this later on demand. Take a screenshot of the slide, record it and commit it to your memory. Our company is called Story Imprinting, right? We believe very firmly that storytelling and narrative is the key to influencing people, influencing outcomes, and building trust. So often in presentations, and again, particularly we see this when we're working with folks like accountants, folks like attorneys, engineers, right, that want to hit you over the head with as much information as possible. The retention, we know that there's science behind this. The retention behind that is extraordinarily low. Conversely, when you are able to position that information against the backdrop of a story, your own story, a colleague's story, a story from someone else in your organization or within your industry, we know that people are 70% more likely to remember that information when presented in a narrative format. We've worked with a lot of attorneys. There's one that worked with Anne Marie in particular, and I'm going to just tell this story, Anne Marie, if you want to jump in. But and the woman was an environmental law attorney. And, environmental law is super, super dense. There's lots of acronyms. And if you're a layperson, even if you work within that niche, the acronyms are confusing, and it's very, very statute heavy, regulatory heavy. And she was designing a presentation and struggling to come up with a story, and Anne Marie was coaching her, and she said, well, tell me about what was it like? It wasn't the clean air.
Well, there were two things. I said, like, where did this, like, it was for those who are here, CERCLA, I'm like, where did this,
yes.
Like, what's the history of this? The history is pretty interesting. So there were two things going on. The history was interesting. And then she had really interesting stories to tell about sort of these clients who were talking about soil, which doesn't sound super exciting or sexy, right? But she tells this hilarious story about she and her colleague from Big Law, who this client was like, yes, it's like they're in this office and they're like, do you want to see our manure pile? And they're like, yes, and they're in like a BMW in heels riding down this, incredibly muddy road, stomping through manure, looking at this. And it's like, it humanizes it, which is what you're trying to do. You're trying to, and again, Holly had mentioned there's a lot of science behind this. We don't have the time to go through that today, but it's around memory. It's around connection. It's around, understanding all of it. So when you don't use story, you are working against human nature. And that's really important for you to understand. This is what we mean when we say don't merely report information. People do not retain just data and information. They absolutely do not. You know who knows this? The medical community. There's never been a health pamphlet that stopped anybody from smoking by telling them what percentage of increase of potential cancer they could get. It doesn't work. You need a human story attached to it in order for people to be able to understand that. So conversion is also about changing behavior. So if you're not trying to get a client, you may be trying to convert behavior, make people behave or think differently, right?
Or adopt your proposal, or if we're talking about something that's internal. I mean, I think like we've just demonstrated, you probably won't remember all 6 bullet points on this slide. You will remember Anne Marie talking about this manure pile, right? Because there is a human element to that. And so when you're designing a presentation, we want you to think about that manure pile and integrate some storytelling into your content. And going with this reporting information, really look at your slides, edit them, and then edit them again. You want to be a miniaturist, right? If you look at our slides, they're beautiful image heavy. Typically, this slide is kind of an aberration from that. And they do not have a lot of text. Why is that? We want you to be looking at us, hanging on what we are saying and remembering us, not staring sort of vacantly into a slide full of text. If you're a lawyer, please, for the love of God, do not put a statute on a slide. Nobody wants to read that. And if they are reading that, they're not listening to what you're saying. Engaging your audience is, really this idea of being didactic. We always, when we're training large groups of people, we always start by saying, this is your time. You could be anywhere else. We want you to make the most of it. And thus, we are not going to be talking at you for 3 hours. I mean, that training was a perfect example of peppering both breakout rooms and also constant opportunities for dialogue into our presentation. And we do this whether we're training together or training on our own. If this speaks to you, can I get an amen in the chat, right? Can I please let us know where you're from, why you're here, what challenges are you facing with virtual speaking engagements, right? So we can really in real time begin to answer and anticipate questions. This leads very well into the ending strong bullet point. Please don't end your presentation by saying, Anne-Marie,
are there any questions? All the air goes out of the room. And here's another reason why. We're going to talk about the Pecan rule, but here's another reason why. When you do that, you're surrendering all your power to the audience. They decide how it ends. So when you end with, do you have any questions? It's like, it goes out of the room. And if they don't, then what? Then what? And if they do, or they're combative, or a million things, that is what is imprinted in the memory of the audience. So you should for sure ask, does anybody have any questions? But that's not where you end. You end in some kind of story. And that is super important from design. And that's like the know, do, feel is really a design question. You should, before you put a single word on a page, a single slide on a deck, you should think about, what do you want people to know, do, and feel in any given audience you're presenting to? That informs what you're going to say. That informs the design of the presentation. And I do want to spend a little time on don'ts, because this is something we didn't dive deeply into because of the economic nature of this particular webinar. But to Holly's point, don't cover your slide in text. Also, don't have graphs that no one can read or understand because they're microscopic and they're absurd. Please do not start with Webster's dictionary definition of leadership is. Please don't do that. Do not do that. That is such a lazy way to start something.
University.
Yeah, it's like, what are you doing? Like, do not start with that. Please do not start with talking about yourself. Please make it audience centric. Please think about how these people can experience some form of transformation before they walk out of those doors, and how they're going to internalize and remember you. And have confidence in what you do know. I remember once I was on a panel and there was an attorney there, and we were all there, and she had these notes, and she was, incredibly smart and accomplished, incredibly. And she had these notes, and she was like sweating and shaking, literally. Her notes were like completely. And I leaned over to her. Before we started, and I said, like, axe the notes. And she goes, I know. I said, no, like, really, just trust yourself, like, trust yourself. And the notes can get in the way. Like, if there's this particular point or bullet point, fine, but writing things out is not. That thing about connecting with, that is such a disconnecting thing to do. It immediately, if you're looking down or you're reading somewhere, you're immediately disconnected this person, and it degrades your authority and command in a presentation virtually as well as live. So these things apply in both ways. And I would also say, when you are virtual, things matter, like your voice, being forward, looking directly into the camera. I cannot tell you how many times I see people doing a lot of this, looking off, looking at another screen. And this is even if they're presenting. People completely kind of disconnect from you. It's important to feel like you're talking to them, like we're connected, we're having a conversation. If it seems like I'm distracted or I'm looking around, then I am not present. And it's hard for you to focus on me.
I would also add to this, if you are speaking with an outside organization or even see if someone can help you with your tech, right? And what I mean by that is advancing the slides, monitoring the chat, screen sharing, doing all of the back end stuff, particularly if it's a format that you don't typically use. Like for me, I have to tell you, like Teams, I just can't. Teams stresses me out. It's not my preferred platform. Zoom is a little bit easier for me to speak and handle the back end. But if make the ask, say the integrity of my presentation will be so much more preserved if I am able to focus on speaking and the content and engaging with the audience in that way and not trying to wear like 9 hats at once. I think it's always worth that ask. And Anne Marie, I know you feel the same.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just a little funky when you're trying to do all of it all at once. And it's one of the things you have control over. If you can make those things smoother, then do it. Yeah. I would also say if you're doing anything, that's with a larger group for an hour or so, if you can use breakout rooms so that they can integrate what you're talking about and chat together. If it is something you would do in a live setting, for sure, do it online. People like the interactivity. It allows them to make that content real and richer and gather questions. Holly and I constantly throughout a presentation, particularly a lengthy one, we will often ask questions of the audience, ask them to drop it in the chat. You can use polls and things like that too. I don't think that that's the major, I'm going to be really honest.
Yeah.
People do that. It's fine. I don't think polls are the most critical thing. I think the chat, you're trying to replicate connection. Is a poll going to do it? I don't know. It's fine, but like, then what? Are you going to read it? Are you going to, you know what I'm saying?
I agree.
It's fine, but it's not the most compelling thing to do. Really what you want to be doing is creating opportunities, to say, hey, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat, which by the way, feel free to drop your questions in the chat or your comments. If you have a scenario or situation, this is a great opportunity for you to ask us. We're here with you right now. If you don't want to do it publicly, then do it privately. Right. That's the way you kind of engage. The other thing I will also say that I think is super helpful is to set the tone. If you have, particularly internally, if people typically disconnect or are doing other things, folding their laundry or I don't know what while people are speaking, it's useful to say, hey, I would really like us all to be present for this. This is 35 or an hour or whatever amount of time, and for us to be connected. So I would just ask all of you, out of respect to your colleagues and yourself, to please be sure to be present, not be multitasking, so that you actually extract as much out of this opportunity as humanly possible.
We just had a comment saying that having a virtual producer has been key for this person's organization. And
yep.
Amen. Yeah. It just it takes a lot of that pressure off of you and allows you to focus on what you're there to do, right? Which is to deliver excellent content.
Yeah. So we were just sort of talking about this, create a didactic experience. We just literally did it. Somebody contributed, in that way. I'm somebody like, listen, I've spoken to as many as 3,000 people in an audience, and I've spoken to as little as, I don't know, 10, I always try to have this tone of didactic experience. So even though there are times you're not expecting them to answer. So what I'll give you an example is I might say, is there anybody else who can relate to that? And you're asking a question in a way, it's almost like, a call and repeat kind of thing. Yeah. Like there's something that it creates this energy of like, who's ever felt this before? Can you feel me? It's like, it's this energy that gets exchanged versus I'm going to talk at you for an hour, which is not as interesting. If you have people's, if you're doing this in a meeting style and you can see everybody, comment, say, I can see everybody rolling their eyes because they know that and they know exactly what I'm talking about. I see a lot of head nodding. I see in the same way you would engage a real-time audience. It matters. They want to be part of that experience. But if it's just this really flat kind of thing, there isn't this didactic connection that allows you to build some humanity into this. Because here's the thing, a screen creates less humanity, but there are ways we can overcome that. But you have to have the energy, the foresight, and the direction to do it. You have to be thinking about it. And again, I know this is like, it's such a harsh word, but I just feel like sometimes people are super lazy and they don't think about it. They throw up a bunch of content and they just read some slides, and that's it. They default to reporting information. What is the one thing you can take away from this particular presentation? We've named a number of things in 30 minutes. One thing that you're going to do differently. That's all we're really asking, So I want to talk about the peak end rule, and I'm going to literally demonstrate how this is done. Because I think it's really important. The peak end rule is based on this research that basically shows that, and by the way, please note, we do not have the research on the screen. And you want to know why? Because you have a computer with the Googles and you can go and you can do your own research if you want. Why would I put this up here for you to read? The peak end rule basically says that human beings largely remember the peak and the end of an experience, any experience. Summer camp, your last job, your last relationship. You remember the peak and the end. Well, what if there is no peak? Then you remember the end. That's what imprints. Here's the problem when it comes to presentations, virtually or otherwise. People really focus on starting strong. And then they start strong and then they like lose steam and it goes off a cliff and they end with, does anybody have any questions? That is not how we ever end. Here is how we do it. And I'm about to do it right now. And I'm deliberately telling you so you understand. We would say, does anybody have any questions? If you have any questions, now's the time to please drop them in the chat. And by the way, now is the time to please drop them in the chat. And then once we've answered those questions and addressed any of those questions, we would move directly into a story. So I'm going to do that right now. And the story I like to tell is I remember being part of this group presentation, which is a whole other thing, right? With a former boss of mine, Alex DeLuna, who was an excellent presenter and had fantastic energy. And we were doing a presentation to developers, and Alex made this suggestion about a way we could do something with these phases in this huge development. And one of the developers interrupted him in the middle of him talking about this and said, well, that's very interesting because that violates the Department of Real Estate's rules. Now, I immediately, I'm like, oh my God, let's all just die and crawl out of here. And it was so, I could just feel myself internally dying. And Alex looks at the screen and looks at the audience and he goes, it does? They said yes. And he goes, then we won't do that. And he just kept going. We got that developer. He made a massive mistake, but what he didn't do is he didn't give it more energy or air or light. He accepted it, he moved on and kept going. It didn't change that we were the best people for the job. It didn't change. Was it embarrassing? Yes. I share this with you because it isn't perfectionism that's going to convert somebody. It isn't perfectionism that necessarily creates connectivity or even, shockingly, authority. It's your humanity. It's your ability to own a mistake. It's your ability to be present. It's your ability to go, okay, then we won't do that, to not berate yourself and to instead focus on what is good and right and why you are valuable. So that's something that I just want to leave you with, that really thinking about perfectionism, people who way over prepare are not necessarily someone who is better at presenting. That preparation would have been super useful, not to humiliate us, but it didn't matter for us getting that client.
We so appreciate you spending time with us today. We do these little short webinars once a month. Our next one is in September about media training. We welcome you to join us. I will be sending out a link to this recording to everyone who registered, and you will be able to view this on demand if you so choose. Please keep in touch with us. Find us. LinkedIn is probably the best way to stay in daily contact with us, both connect with us individually and also follow Story Imprinting for lots of great storytelling tips, executive leadership tips, and we wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, Anne Marie. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.